My own daughter suddenly became very thoughtful. That Tuesday morning, she brought a pot of creamy asparagus stew to the repair shop. "Eat, Dad. I made your favorite dish. You look so tired." But I was fasting for my diabetes checkup, so I took the pot of soup to the hospital and gave it to my son-in-law, who was working the night shift and was exhausted. Just 1 hour later, emergency announcements rang out in the hallway. I ran to see what was happening, and the medical crisis before me completely broke me down on the spot. This story begins with a bowl of soup and ends somewhere unexpected. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell me, what are you doing while you listen, driving, working, cooking, or unwinding? Your presence here truly matters. Quick note, some details have been adjusted for storytelling. The lesson at the heart of this is what I hope stays with you. My daughter showed up that Tuesday morning with a pot of soup and a smile I had no reason to question. That's the part that stays with me now. Not the hidden substances, not the manipulated documents, not the courtroom or the legal consequences, or any of the machinery that came afterward. What stays with me is the smile, how completely ordinary it looked, how completely I believed it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually began. 6:30 in the morning, the first Tuesday of November, 2023. I unlocked the front door of Bell's Auto Repair the way I had for 40 years. Key in the deadbolt one shoulder, against the frame where it always stuck in cold weather. Then the particular give of the door swinging inward on its familiar hinges. The oil and metal smell hit me before the lights came on, and for a moment I just stood there in the dark, breathing it in the way some people breathe, in the smell of bread or firewood or rain. That smell was home. Had been home longer than any house I'd ever lived in. I hit the fluorescent switches along the wall. The tubes buzzed to life overhead, one of them flickering twice before settling the same one that had been flickering since August and that I kept meaning to replace. The garage bay came into view, a Honda Civic up on the second lift rear wheels, off waiting for the brake job I'd planned to finish by noon. Beyond it, the workbench I'd built from scratch in 1993. Every tool hanging in the same place, it had always hung chrome and steel gleaming dully in the morning light. I made coffee first. I always made coffee first. The old percolator on the shelf beside the parts catalog sputtered and hissed, while I pulled on my coverall and checked the appointment book. Tuesday morning was quiet. That was the pattern. The regular rush came Thursday through Saturday when people had the weekend ahead of them and suddenly remembered their vehicles needed attention. Tuesday belonged to the Honda and the transmission job scheduled for the afternoon, and that suited me fine. While the coffee brewed, I glanced at Renee's photo on the shelf above the workbench. Our 20th anniversary taken the summer before the diagnosis. She had her hand up shielding her eyes from the sun, laughing at something just out of frame, and the laugh had made it into the picture perfectly, that unguarded whole-body kind of happiness she had. 3 years since I'd lost her, and the photograph still sometimes stopped me cold in the middle of whatever I was doing. "Morning," I said to her the way I always did. Then I poured my coffee. My phone buzzed at 7 minutes to 6. A text from Evander, time-stamped 5:47. "Just finished night shift, exhausted. See you later this week." I read it twice. Evander was my son-in-law, married to my daughter Paloma, for 8 years, and he worked as a nurse at Allen County Hospital across town. He'd been covering for a colleague on extended medical leave, pulling double shifts all week, sometimes 16 hours straight. He was 35 years old and running on vending machine coffee and sheer determination, and it showed in these early morning texts that arrived after brutal overnights before he drove home to the house he and Paloma shared. I typed back, "Get some rest, son. You work too hard." Then I checked my calendar. The reminder sat there in red fasting blood work, 10 a.m., Dr. Morrison. Diabetes screening. I'd been postponing this appointment for the better part of 4 months, but my doctor had stopped accepting excuses after my last checkup flagged elevated glucose levels. No food, no coffee after midnight. I'd had my cup already, but since I'd made it before 6, I decided that was close enough to a technicality. The point was, there would be no breakfast, and my stomach was already registering a complaint. I looked at the small refrigerator in the corner, where I kept sandwich fixings during the week. I looked back at my appointment reminder. Then I went to start on the Honda's rear brakes, which at least gave my hands something to do. The shop phone rang at 7:15, a regular customer named Donnelly, wanting an oil change. I scheduled him for Thursday, wrote it in the book, went back to the Honda. The fluorescent tube in the corner kept flickering. The percolator sat empty on the shelf. It was an ordinary morning, right up until it wasn't. At 7:45, the front door chimed. Paloma came in, carrying a large stainless steel pot, the kind with loop handles on both sides, the kind meant for serious cooking. She was wearing her work uniform from Riverside Pharmacy, the blue scrubs with her name embroidered on the chest in white thread. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail. At 30, she had the same wide-set eyes her mother had given her, and the same quality of attention in them when she looked at you, the feeling that you had her complete focus. She set the pot on the reception desk, and the smell arrived with it rich buttery, the distinct green vegetable depth of asparagus that Renee had loved to cook on cold November mornings. My stomach made an immediate and vigorous argument for breakfast. "I made this for you," Paloma said. "Creamy asparagus soup, your favorite. You've been looking exhausted lately, Dad." My first instinct was straightforward gratitude. My daughter had gotten up early before a full workday to cook something she knew I loved and drive it across town. There was nothing in that picture that invited suspicion. "This is incredibly thoughtful," I said, wiping my hands on my work rag. "But I can't eat. I have fasting blood work at 10. Diabetes screening." Something shifted in her expression. A small hesitation quickly covered. "I didn't realize." Then the brightness returned smooth and immediate. "Well, you'll be starving after the appointment. I brought a thermos. You can take some with you and eat right after." She pulled a large thermos from the canvas bag over her shoulder and began ladling soup into it herself, working carefully, filling it almost to the rim. The steam rose in steady columns in the cold air of the shop. She screwed the lid down firmly, then set it on the desk between us. "There," she said. "That'll stay warm through your appointment and then some." "You really didn't need to go to all this trouble," I said. "You're my dad." She said it simply matter-of-factly, the way people state things they consider obvious. "I worry about you out here alone all morning." I went to my office to grab my coat, a 10-foot walk around the corner, out of sight for maybe 20 seconds, while I took the jacket from the hook and checked my pockets for my keys. When I came back, Paloma had the thermos in both hands and was tightening the lid one final time. She held it out and I took it, warm against my palms, solid and heavy with a full portion of soup her hands had made. She hugged me quickly the way she always had, brief, genuine, a little distracted. I caught the faint scent of her shampoo. "Let me know how the test goes," she said, already moving toward the door. "I will, thank you, sweetheart." The door chimed when she left. Through the window I watched her cross the parking lot to her car, open the door, and sit for a moment before starting the engine. I set the thermos on my passenger seat 90 minutes later when I locked up to leave for my appointment. It sat there warm and still, the most innocent-looking object in the world. I had no idea that handing that container to someone I loved would bring them within moments of a critical life-threatening medical crisis. Leaving the shop parking lot at 9:30, I headed east on DuPont Road toward Allen County Hospital. Since my blood work wasn't scheduled until 10, the fresh soup would have sat in the truck cab. Turning it into waste felt wrong, especially after Paloma's gesture. That was when Evander's early morning text flashed back into my mind. He'd been pulling double shifts all week covering for a colleague on medical leave, 16-hour days, sometimes longer. When I'd asked him about it last Sunday, he'd admitted he was barely eating, grabbing vending machine snacks between patients, drinking too much coffee, running on fumes. "He's been pulling doubles all week," I said aloud to my empty truck. "Paloma's soup won't go to waste after all." The decision felt obvious, natural. I'd swing by the hospital, find Evander on his break, give him real food. He'd been checking on me for 3 years since Renee died, since Paloma seemed to pull away into her own busy life. The least I could do was make sure he ate a decent meal. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 8:15. 20 minutes to the hospital. I'll still make my appointment. The morning traffic was light. I took the same route I'd driven 100 times to visit Renee during her treatments, past the strip malls and fast food restaurants, past the elementary school where Paloma had learned to read, past the church where we'd buried my wife on a Tuesday exactly like this one. The thermos stayed warm against my leg where I'd wedged it between the seats. I could smell the asparagus through the sealed lid, that rich buttery scent that reminded me of better days. I thought about the irony Paloma making soup for me giving it to her husband. She'd probably laugh when I told her. Maybe it would remind her that we were still a family, even with Renee gone, even with the distance that had grown between us lately. Small moments of connection, that's what families were built on. I parked in the hospital visitor lot at 8:32. The building rose against the gray sky, 7 stories of brick and glass, where Evander spent more time than he did at home. I grabbed the thermos and headed through the automatic doors into the antiseptic smell of the lobby. The volunteer at the information desk recognized me. "Mr. Bell, here for an appointment. Blood work at 10, I said. "But I'm looking for Evander Garrett first. He's on shift emergency department nurse. Do you know where I could find him?" She checked her computer. "He's on break, probably in the doctor's lounge on the 3rd floor. Take the elevator up, turn left, and the 3rd door on the right." How many times in life do we deliver an unintended crisis with our own hands thinking we're delivering love? I found the break room exactly where she'd said. The door was ajar. Inside, Evander lay sprawled on a worn leather couch, still in his scrubs, one arm flung over his eyes. Even in sleep, he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his face thinner than I remembered from Sunday dinner. Evander Garrett was 35 years old, a nurse who'd worked his way up from EMT to emergency department charge nurse over 12 years. He'd married my daughter when he was 27 and she was 22. Good man, steady, the kind of son I'd hoped for. "Evander," I said softly. He jerked awake, blinking. "Dad, what is everything okay?" "Everything's fine." I held up the thermos. "Brought you breakfast." He sat up, slowly rubbing his face. Then his eyes focused on the thermos, and something like hope crossed his features. "Is that all? Did Paloma make soup?" "Asparagus cream. I was fasting for blood work, so I couldn't eat it. Thought of you." "God, I'm starving." He reached for the thermos with both hands like a man reaching for salvation. "I had coffee at midnight and nothing since." "You're a lifesaver, Dad." I pulled a spoon from the break room drawer, the kind wrapped in plastic, institutional and sterile. He twisted open the thermos lid, and steam rose, carrying that rich smell into the small room. The first spoonful disappeared into his mouth. His eyes closed. "Oh, that's good. That's really good." I sat in the chair across from him, watching him eat. He was ravenous, barely pausing between bites, the spoon scraping the thermos sides. "Now, how's the diabetes situation?" he asked between spoonfuls. "Are you nervous about the test?" "Not really, just a screening. The doctor thinks my numbers are borderline." "Are you taking care of yourself? Eating regular meals?" "Yes, Mom," I said, and he grinned. "Someone has to worry about you." He tilted the thermos to get the last of the soup. "Paloma and I were talking about having you over more often. She worries too. She just doesn't always show it the way you'd expect." "I know," I said, though lately I wasn't sure I did know. Paloma had been distant the past few months, canceling Sunday dinners, short on the phone, always busy with work or errands or things she didn't quite explain. Evander finished the soup and set the empty thermos on the table beside him. He stood stretched and pulled me into a quick hug, the kind men give when they mean it, but won't say so. "You raised a good woman, Dad," he said. "Tell her this was perfect. Tell her I love her." "I will." He checked his watch. "I've got 15 minutes left on break. You should get to your appointment. Don't want you keeping the lab waiting." "You're right." I picked up the empty thermos, still warm. "Get some rest. You look like hell." "Love you, Dad," he said. "Love you too, son." I can still see his face when he tasted that soup, pure gratitude, zero suspicion, and it haunts me. I left him there in that break room, empty thermos in my hand, heading to my blood work appointment 15 minutes away. Those were the last normal words we ever exchanged. In exactly 52 minutes, his body would face a severe medical emergency. I was sitting in the waiting room when the announcement came over the hospital intercom. The intercom crackled to life just as I opened a magazine about vintage cars. Code Blue Doctor's Break Room. Code Blue Doctor's Break Room. I looked up from the waiting room chair, magazine frozen in my hands. Code Blue meant a severe medical emergency, but doctors' break rooms. That made no sense. Emergencies happened in patient rooms and hallways in the emergency department, not in the break room where I'd left Evander. The magazine hit the floor. I was running before I consciously decided to move. Down the hallway past the phlebotomy desk, where a nurse called after me around the corner, toward the stairs. My blood work appointment was forgotten. The empty thermos still in my truck, or maybe I'd left it. I couldn't remember, couldn't think past the sound of my shoes slapping linoleum and that voice crackling overhead. All available personnel, doctors, break room, third floor, where I'd left him 20 minutes ago, where he'd smiled and said, "Love you, Dad," and finished the last spoonful of soup. The hallway outside the break room swarmed with people. Nurses, doctors, someone wheeling a crash cart, all converging on that doorway like wasps to a nest. A security guard, young maybe 25 uncertain, stepped in front of me as I tried to push through. So you can't, that's a restricted emergency. My son-in-law, I gasped. Evander Garrett, he's in there. The guard's hand stayed firm on my chest, but in the chaos of bodies moving, I caught a glimpse through the gap in the doorway. Evander lay on the floor between the couch and the coffee table, his back arched unnaturally, head thrown back, arms rigid at his sides. A woman in surgical scrubs straddled his chest, hands locked together, doing compressions with mechanical precision. Someone else, another nurse, squeezed an ambu bag over his face. The EKG monitor screamed a jagged, irregular rhythm that even I with no medical training recognized as wrong. Charging to 200, the woman doing compressions said. Her voice was steady, calm, like she was ordering coffee. Clear. Everyone's hands lifted. Evander's body jerked when the electricity hit a full-body spasm that looked like something from a horror movie. The monitor's scream changed, pitch flattened, then picked up again in a different rhythm. And still V-fib, someone called, charging to 300. Come on, Evander, come on, the woman said, still calm, still steady. You don't get to die on my shift. The security guard pulled me back gently. Sir, please, let them work. There's a waiting area. I let him guide me away because I couldn't watch anymore. I couldn't stand there and see my son-in-law's body jump like a fish on a dock while machines screamed and strangers tried to restart his heart. The waiting area was 10 feet down the hall, a cluster of chairs facing a window that looked out on the parking lot where my truck sat with its empty thermos. I collapsed into one and realized I was shaking. Minutes passed, or hours, I couldn't tell. The clock on the wall said 9:55, which meant only 15 minutes since the code blue, which felt impossible. I've replayed that glimpse through the doorway 1,000 times, my son-in-law's body jerking, when the electricity hit the sound of the monitor, screaming the smell of fear mixed with antiseptic, and it never gets easier. At 10:15, they wheeled Evander past on a gurney. He was alive. I could see the oxygen mask fogging with shallow breaths. I could see his chest rising and falling, but his eyes were closed and he looked gray, the color of old concrete. 2 nurses flanked the gurney. One squeezed the ambu bag. The other watched the portable monitor with the focused intensity of a chess player facing a checkmate. They didn't look at me as they passed. Mr. Bell. I turned. The woman who'd been doing compression stood beside me, surgical scrubs splattered with something I didn't want to identify. She was younger than I'd thought, maybe 37, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that had seen too much death to be surprised by it anymore. I'm Dr. Ilaria Finch, she said. Emergency physician. I was on call when they found him. Is he, Willie? He's alive. We got him back. She sat in the chair beside me, close enough that I could smell the antiseptic soap on her hands. But Mr. Bell, his labs came back. His internal chemical levels are critically elevated at 9.8. I stared at her. The words meant nothing. What does that mean? My voice sounded hollow. Is that bad? Normal levels should be between 3.5 and 5. She spoke slowly, carefully, like she was explaining a major system failure to a child. A level of 9.8 causes an immediate and severe physical collapse. It completely overwhelms the system, and an imbalance that extreme doesn't happen naturally in a healthy 35-year-old man. The hallway tilted. I gripped the chair arms. We ran the test 3 times, she continued. Same result. That level of potassium means ingestion, recent ingestion, within the last hour. I don't understand, I said, but I was starting to. What did he eat this morning? The question hung in the air between us like a blade. Soup, I whispered. I brought him soup in a thermos. He was hungry. He hadn't eaten since midnight. Dr. Finch stood and walked to the break room doorway. The chaos had cleared just yellow caution tape now, and one nurse bagging items in plastic. She pointed. Through the doorway, I could see the coffee table. The thermos sat there beside a plastic spoon, exactly where Evander had left it after scraping out the last drops. 9.8. Normal is 5. Someone poisoned my son-in-law. I stood on legs that barely held me and walked to the break room doorway. The nurse glanced up, then stepped aside when Dr. Finch nodded. I turned and looked at that thermos sitting on the break room table, stainless steel, Renee's old one, the one I'd filled with Paloma's soup that morning, the gift I'd brought, the container I'd carried warm against my chest. And I understood. Paloma had made that soup. Paloma had ladled it into the thermos herself. Paloma had smiled when I said I couldn't eat it because of my fasting blood work. The soup wasn't for Evander, it was for me. Within the hour, a detective I'd known for 20 years would arrive, asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. When your oldest friend walks into a hospital waiting room with a badge clipped to his belt and a notepad in his hand, you know the friendship is about to be tested. Inspector Quentin Riddle stood in the doorway at 11 o'clock, 48 years old, and carrying 20 years of shared history between us. He'd helped me rebuild an engine block in 1998, been a pallbearer at Renee's funeral, sat at my dinner table so many times I kept a coffee mug just for him. Now he stood there with professional distance in his eyes. "Harold," he said quietly. "Quentin." He sat beside me, not across which I appreciated, and opened his notepad. Through the hallway window, the thermos sat on the evidence table, sealed in plastic. "I need you to walk me through this morning," he said. "Everything. Starting when you woke up." I told him. 6:30 at the shop, coffee, Renee's photo, Evander's text about missing dinner, my diabetes appointment. Paloma arrived at 7:45 with the soup. Quentin's pen moved steadily. "What time did you leave for the hospital?" 8:10, maybe 8:15. "And Paloma was there when you left?" "No, she left first. Had to get to work." His pen paused. "So after she left, you were alone with the thermos?" "Yes." "Did you open it? Check the contents?" "No, it was sealed. She'd filled it right in front of me." "Paloma brought the soup around 7:45, I said. "I couldn't eat it fasting for my diabetes test, so I brought it to Evander." Quentin wrote something, then looked up. His eyes weren't a friend's eyes anymore. They were a cop's eyes. "Who else besides Paloma had access to that container before you gave it to Evander?" The question landed like a stone. "No one," I said. Then I thought about it. "I mean, it was on my desk while I got my coat, but no one was there." "Where was Paloma while you were getting your coat?" "Default. Is me dit cool by Friday first." I opened my mouth. I closed it. Paloma had been in the reception area. I'd walked to my office 10 feet away out of sight for maybe 20 seconds. When I came back, she was tightening the lid. "She was waiting," I said. "Alone with the thermos?" "For a few seconds, 20 maybe, but she'd already sealed it." Quentin wrote that down. The silence stretched. Have you ever had to look a friend in the eye and realize they're silently calculating whether you're capable of murder? Dr. Finch's preliminary analysis suggests potassium chloride, Quentin said. Enough to stop a heart. Do you know where someone would get that? I shook my head. Pharmacy, he said quietly. It's used in medical settings. Access is controlled, but a pharmacy employee would know how to obtain it. The implication hung between us. Paloma wouldn't, I said. My voice lacked conviction. I'm gathering facts. The thermos came from your shop. You brought it here. Evander nearly died. Now I need to understand how the poison got there. He flipped back a page. Was Paloma aware of your diabetes appointment? I don't think I mentioned it. I told her I was fasting, but not why. So she brought you soup knowing you were fasting. The question hit differently this time. Why bring soup if she knew I couldn't eat it? She said I could heat it up after my appointment, I whispered. Quentin nodded, wrote something else. I wanted to defend her, wanted to say she would never, this was all a mistake. But the words wouldn't come. Footsteps in the hallway, fast, urgent. Paloma burst into the waiting room. At 11:45, hair disheveled, makeup smeared from crying, breathing hard. When she saw me, she made a sound, half sob, half gasp, and rushed over. Yet she wrapped her arms around me, shaking. I just got Evander's text about an emergency. What happened? Is he okay? Boss is at winds of bost. I held her, feeling the familiar shape of my daughter in my arms. He collapsed, I said. Cardiac arrest. They saved him, but they think there was something in the soup. She pulled back her face, a mask of confusion and horror. The soup. But I made that with love. I was trying to do something nice for you. Her eyes swept the waiting room, took in Quentin with his notepad, the tension in the air. Then her gaze found the break room doorway, the evidence table visible through the window, the thermos sealed in plastic. She stared at it for exactly 1 second. Then her eyes darted away. In that split second, watching my daughter's eyes find that thermos and then dart away, a crack opened in my certainty that would only widen. Mrs. Garrett, Quentin said, standing. I'm Inspector Quentin Riddle. I need to ask you a few questions about this morning. Of course, Paloma said. Her voice was steady now, too steady. Anything to help. I can't believe this happened. I made that soup from scratch. I was so careful. What time did you prepare it? Around 6:30, before my shift. I wanted Dad to have something healthy. And you brought it to his shop at 7:45. Yes, I knew he'd be there early. He always is. Quentin wrote, Paloma watched him write. I watched Paloma watching him. Did anyone else have access to the soup between preparation and delivery? Was certainty, and and no, she said immediately. Just me. I made it in my kitchen, sealed it in the pot, drove straight to the shop. She looked at me, then eyes wet with tears that might have been real or might have been performance. Dad, you have to believe me. I would never hurt Evander. I love him. I held my daughter close, feeling her shoulders shake, with what I wanted to believe were tears of worry. But my hands were trembling for a different reason. I was trying to remember exactly how long she'd been alone in my office that morning. 20 seconds, 30. Long enough. That night I would find myself doing something I'd never imagined, searching my own home for evidence against my own child. The house had never felt this empty, not even in the first weeks after Renee died, because then I'd been grieving someone I understood, not doubting someone I thought I knew. I stood in the dark entryway at 11 o'clock that night, my hand still on the door I'd just locked. The hospital had said Evander was stable, sedated, alive. They'd run more tests, started dialysis to flush the poison from his blood, moved him to intensive care, where machines breathed for him and beeped his heartbeat into the antiseptic air. I'd left Paloma there in the waiting room, her face buried in her hands, sobbing, or appearing to sob. I couldn't tell anymore. I didn't turn on the lights, just stood there in the darkness, letting my eyes adjust, until I could make out the familiar shapes, Renee's coat rack by the door, the living room furniture beyond the staircase leading up to the bedroom, where I knew I wouldn't sleep tonight. Instead, I walked to the living room and sat in Renee's chair, the one I'd kept exactly where she'd left it, with her reading lamp beside it and her last crossword puzzle still folded on the side table. 20 seconds. That's how long I'd been in my office getting my coat. 20 seconds, maybe 30. I walked around the corner out of sight and grabbed my jacket from the hook. When I came back, Paloma had been tightening the thermos lid. She was alone for 20 seconds, I whispered to the empty room. Maybe 30. How long does it take to pour powder into a container? 3 seconds. 5, if you're being careful. If you've practiced. I closed my eyes and replayed it again. Paloma arrives at 7:45, smiles bright, the soup pot in her hands. The careful way she'd ladled the soup into the thermos right in front of me, making sure I saw her being thoughtful and loving. I made this for you, Dad. Creamy asparagus, your favorite. You've looked tired lately. But I've been fasting. She knew that I'd told her. So, why bring soup I couldn't eat? You can heat it up after your appointment, she'd said. After. When I'd be hungry. When I'd eat it without question because my daughter had been thinking of me. The thermos was meant for me. I sat there in the darkness, feeling the truth settle into my bones like cold. Evander had eaten my death. Evander had seized and stopped breathing, and nearly died because I'd given him the gift meant to kill me. But why? That was the question I couldn't answer. Why would my daughter want me dead? How well do we really know our children, the adults they become, when we're not looking? I thought about Paloma at 7, missing her front tooth helping me change oil in the shop. Paloma at 15 crying on Renee's shoulder about a boy who'd broken her heart. Paloma at 22 walking down the aisle toward Evander, her face radiant. When had she changed? When had the daughter I knew become someone who could measure poison into soup and smile while doing it? Or had she always been this person and I'd just never seen it? I thought about Renee. What would she say if she were here? We raised a good girl, Harold, I could hear her voice saying. She's just practical sometimes, that's all. Practical. That's what Renee had always called it when Paloma found shortcuts, bent rules, did whatever it took to get what she wanted. Practical when she'd copied someone's homework in high school. Practical when she'd lied about working late to meet friends. Practical when she'd taken money from my wallet without asking and returned it before I noticed. Small things, harmless things. Until they weren't. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. 11:15, 11:20, 11:30. I sat there in Renee's chair in the darkness and felt something die that Renee's death hadn't killed my certainty that love was enough. Then I remembered the boxes. 3 weeks ago, maybe 4, Paloma had shown up on a Saturday afternoon with cardboard boxes in her trunk. Medical supply boxes with the Riverside Pharmacy logo printed on the sides. Just old supplies the pharmacy was throwing out, she'd said when I asked. Expired stuff, discontinued items. I thought I'd take them before they went in the dumpster. You never know when you might need bandages or gauze. I'd helped her carry them to the basement, down to the corner, where she'd kept her childhood toys and books. We'd stacked them behind her old bookshelf out of the way. "Thanks, Dad," she'd said, kissing my cheek. "You're the best." I hadn't thought about it again. Hadn't questioned why she'd want expired medical supplies, why she'd stored them at my house instead of hers, why she'd seemed so particular about where exactly I should place them. Now, sitting in the dark, Quentin's words echoed in my head. Potassium chloride. It's used in medical settings. A pharmacy employee would know how to obtain it. Expired supplies, discontinued items, things the pharmacy was throwing out anyway, so no one would miss them. No inventory discrepancy, no questions asked. My hands started shaking. I stood from Renee's chair, walked through the dark house to the kitchen, then to the door that led to the basement. My hand found the light switch cold metal under my fingertips. I stood there for a full minute knowing that once I went down those stairs, I couldn't unknow what I might find. Everything would change. The daughter I thought I had would be gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "Please let me be wrong," I whispered. "Please let those boxes be nothing." But I already knew. Somewhere deep in my gut, where fathers know things about their children they wish they didn't, I already knew. I flipped the switch. The basement stairs lit up bare wooden steps leading down into what had been Paloma's childhood playroom, now storage for forgotten things. I descended into my daughter's old childhood room, praying I was wrong. What I found in those boxes would answer every question I'd been afraid to ask. The first box was lighter than it should have been, the kind of wrong weight that tells you something's missing before you even look inside. The basement light, a single bare bulb, cast harsh shadows across the stacked cardboard behind Paloma's old toy shelf. 3 boxes, Riverside Pharmacy logos printed on the sides in blue and white. The same boxes I'd helped her carry down here 3 weeks ago when she'd smiled and kissed my cheek and called me the best dad. My hands shook as I pulled the first box forward. The cardboard scraped across concrete with a sound like fingernails on stone. I opened the flaps. 3 bottles lay inside, glass catching the light. Empty. I lifted one, outturned it in my hands. The label was clinical precise, potassium chloride, concentrate warning. Controlled substance. Storage instructions. Dosage warnings. A red poison symbol. Below that smaller print, 9.8 milliequivalents per liter. Potassium chloride concentrate. I read aloud to the empty basement. 9.8 milliequivalents per liter. That's what Dr. Ilaria said, 9.8. The same number, exactly the same. I set the bottle down carefully, like it might explode. Opened the second box. 4 more empty bottles, same labels, same warnings, same concentration. The third box held 2 bottles and something else, a thick manila envelope at the bottom. The kind lawyers use for important documents. 7 empty bottles total. No, I went back to the first box, looked more carefully. 9. 9 empty bottles that had once held enough poison to stop a human heart. She told me these were old supplies. I said to the empty room, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. I believed her. I helped her carry them down here. I thought about that Saturday afternoon. Paloma pulled up in her car trunk full of cardboard boxes. Her casual explanation about expired supplies the pharmacy was throwing out. My helpful father routine carrying boxes down the basement stairs, stacking them exactly where she indicated. "A little to the left, Dad. Perfect. Thanks so much." She'd hidden her murder weapon in my house. In her childhood room, surrounded by the toys I'd bought her, the bookshelf I'd built when she was 6. 9 empty bottles. 9 times she went to that pharmacy warehouse. 9 times she planned my death and while smiling at Sunday dinner. I sat down hard on the basement floor, my legs giving out. The cold concrete seeped through my jeans. Above my head, Paloma's old mobile still hung from the ceiling, plastic stars and moons that Renee had put up when Paloma was a baby. I picked up the manila envelope with hands that had forgotten how to be steady. Inside papers, legal-sized cream-colored official-looking. The first document made my vision blur. Last will and testament. Below that, centered Harold Eugene Bell. My middle name. The one only Renee and Paloma knew. I hated the one I never used. But there it was, typed in professional font on what looked like legitimate legal letterhead. I read the first paragraph aloud, my voice strange and distant. I, Harold Eugene Bell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and declare this to be my last will and testament. My eyes skipped down the page, legal language I barely understood, executor provisions, asset distribution clauses, then the meat of it. I hereby bequeath all property and assets, including but not limited to Bell's Auto Repair, located at 472 1 Tillman Road, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and all associated equipment inventory and real estate holdings to my daughter Paloma Bell. The signature line at the bottom made my stomach turn. Harold Eugene Bell. My signature. The way I looped the H, the sharp angle of the B, the slight upward tilt of the entire name that came from 40 years of signing invoices on a tilted desk. That's my signature, I whispered. But I never signed this. I pulled out my wallet with shaking hands and extracted my driver's license. Hold it next to the will under the harsh light. The signatures matched, not close matched. Every loop, every angle, every characteristic flourish I'd developed over 6 decades of writing my own name. I flipped through the rest of the will, dated 3 weeks ago, notarized or appearing to be notarized with an embossed seal in the bottom right corner. Witness signatures I didn't recognize. Beneath the will, another document, simpler. A receipt on letterhead reading, Legal Services LLC with an Indianapolis address. Services rendered will preparation and notarization. Fee $2,800. Payment received cash. Transparent code. Legal Services. LLC probably didn't exist. The $2,800 was the price of forgery. The cash meant no paper trail. I sat on the cold basement floor where Paloma used to play with dolls, holding proof she'd planned to inherit everything after poisoning me, and wondered when exactly I'd lost my daughter. Has it been gradual years of small betrayals building to this? Or had there been a moment, a specific day, a specific decision, when she'd looked at me and stopped seeing a father and started seeing an obstacle? Maybe it had been when Renee died, and Paloma realized the shop would eventually be mine alone to give away. Maybe it had been when she'd married Evander and realized his nurse's salary wouldn't buy the life she wanted. Maybe it had been a month ago, a week ago, yesterday morning, when she'd stood in my shop with poison hidden in her purse. I thought about Renee. What would she say? She forged my name, I said to Renee's memory, to the empty basement to God, or whoever was listening. She planned to kill me and steal the shop. Our daughter did this. The words didn't make it more real. They just made it louder. I held my driver's license next to that forged signature, comparing every loop and slant. She'd practiced my handwriting until she could replicate it perfectly. How long had that taken? Weeks, months? Had she traced my signature from old documents practiced on scrap paper in her apartment, refined each letter until even I couldn't tell the difference? The question burning through me wasn't whether she'd done it anymore. It was what else I'd find in that envelope. The second document would show me exactly how far her planning had gone. The third document wasn't about inheritance, it was about theft while I was still breathing. I pulled it from the manila envelope with hands that had stopped trembling and started going numb. A mortgage contract, thick official printed on the same cream-colored paper as the will. Property address 4721 Tillman Road, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Bell's Auto Repair. Borrower Harold Eugene Bell. Lender Midwest Property Solutions, LLC. Principal amount $175,000. Date October 15th, 2023. 3 weeks ago, the same day as the forged will. I carried the document upstairs to the kitchen, turned on the overhead light, and spread it across the counter. The fluorescent bulb buzzed, casting everything in harsh white. The signature line at the bottom showed my name in that same perfect forgery. But this document was worse than the will because it didn't wait for my death. I read the fine print aloud to the empty kitchen, my voice echoing off the cabinets Renee had picked out 20 years ago. In the event of the borrower's death property to be liquidated at fair market auction within 90 days, Creditor LLC holds priority bidding rights and first right of refusal at auction. I read it again, then again. She mortgaged my shop, I said to no one, with my forged signature, planning to buy it from herself after I die. The mathematics were elegant in their cruelty. Paloma creates a shell company, forges a mortgage using my signature. When I die, when the poison soup does its job, the shop goes to auction to pay the fake debt. Her shell company bids, wins with priority rights, acquires the property for pennies on the dollar. Clean, legal, untraceable back to murder. I pulled out my phone, searched for Midwest Property Solutions, LLC. The Indiana Secretary of State Business Registry loaded. One result. Midwest Property Solutions, LLC registered. October 10th, 2023, 5 days before the mortgage. Registered agent Paloma M. Bell. Business address 2847. Oakwood Drive, Fort Wayne, Paloma and Evander's house. My daughter owns the company that would steal my life's work, I whispered. 30 years I'd built that shop. Renee and I had scraped together the down payment in 1993, working 2 jobs each eating ramen and day-old bread. We'd painted the walls ourselves. I'd installed every lift, every tool rack, every light fixture. Paloma had learned to count there, playing with socket wrenches on the garage floor, while Renee did the books. I looked at the photo of Bell's auto repair on my phone, the garage where Renee brought Paloma every Saturday, where our daughter learned to count using socket wrenches, and understood she'd been pricing it like a commodity, not a memory. 2 more documents remained in the envelope. I pulled them both out, laid them side by side under the buzzing light. Life insurance policies, identical format, different names. The first, Harold Eugene Bell. Date of birth matching mine. Social Security number I recognized with 6 certainty. Policy amount $2 million. Application date July 15th, 2023. 4 months of planning before the soup. Beneficiary Paloma Bell. Signature line my perfect forgery again. The second policy made my stomach drop through the floor. Insured Evander James Garrett. Policy amount $1,500,000. Beneficiary Paloma Bell. Signature line Evander's signature. Or what I assumed was a forgery of it. I'd seen him sign enough birthday cards to recognize the sharp angles of his name. Death benefit payable to sole beneficiary. Paloma Bell within 30 days of validated death certificate. I read from the first policy, then the second, identical language. I found a notepad in the kitchen drawer, the one where Renee used to write grocery lists and did the math with shaking hands. Life insurance, Harold, $2 million. Life insurance, Evander, $1,500,000. Bell's auto repair market value, approximately $280,000. Total $3,780,000. $3.78 million. I stared at the number, rewrote it. The figure didn't change. $2 million for me, I said aloud. 1.5 for Evander. The shop makes $3.78 million total. The insurance policies had been opened in July. The mortgage will be forged in October. The poison soup was delivered in November. 4 months of planning. 4 months of researching potassium chloride. Practicing my signature creating shell companies. Forging documents, calculating payouts. 4 months of Sunday dinners where she'd smiled at me across the table and asked how I was feeling, if I was eating enough, if I was taking care of myself. Concern that wasn't love. It was investment portfolio management. $3.78 million. That's what my daughter thought I was worth dead. That's what she thought Evander was worth dead. That's what 30 years of my marriage, my work, my life added up to in her ledger. But here was the thing that made my blood run cold. She'd insured both of us. The soup was meant for me. I knew that. I'd been fasting, I couldn't eat it, so I gave it to Evander. Accident. Wrong victim. But she'd prepared for that possibility. She'd forged insurance policies for both of us. Either death worked, both deaths worked even better. She didn't care which one of us died, I said to the empty kitchen, to Renee's ghost, to whatever God was watching this horror unfold. She just needed someone dead to cash in. Maybe the plan had always been flexible. Poison me, collect $2 million plus the shop. If that failed, pivot. Evander was insured too. $1.5 million was still a fortune. Try again later for the father. Collect both payouts eventually. Or maybe, and this thought made me physically ill, maybe she'd planned to poison us both. Make it look like food poisoning from a bad restaurant. A tragic accident, 2 funerals, $3.78 million, and a widow's sympathy. I sat at that kitchen table at 1:30 in the morning, surrounded by documents proving my daughter had planned to murder me for money, had accidentally poisoned her own husband instead, and had valued both our lives at exactly $3.78 million. The only question left was what I was going to do about it. At 2 in the morning, I picked up my phone and called the one person who could help me decide. The hardest thing I've ever done wasn't burying my wife. It was dialing my best friend's number at 2 in the morning to report my daughter for grand larceny and systemic forgery. Quentin answered on the second ring voice alert despite the hour. 20 years as a detective taught you to wake fast. Harold, what's wrong? I need you at my house, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat empty, decided. Now? I'm on my way. No questions, no hesitation. Just the sound of him moving keys jangling a door closing. That's what 20 years of friendship bought you. I hung up and looked at the documents spread across my kitchen table. 9 empty poison bottles lined up beside the forged will, the fake mortgage, the dual insurance policies. Everything Paloma had planned. Everything she'd stolen. Everything I needed to show Quentin to make him understand. This wasn't grief talking, this was evidence. Headlights swept across my front window 20 minutes later. I heard his car door slam his footsteps on my porch. I opened the door before he could knock. Quentin stood there in jeans and a jacket thrown over a t-shirt. Hair uncombed, face creased with concern and the remnants of sleep. What, Harold, what's happened? He stepped inside, eyes scanning me for injury. Are you okay? I gestured toward the kitchen. I found these in Paloma's room, all of it. The poison, the forged documents, everything. He followed me to the kitchen table, stood there under the buzzing fluorescent light, staring at the evidence I'd arranged in neat rows like autopsy findings. He didn't touch anything at first, just looked. His eyes moved from the poison bottles to the will, to the mortgage, to the insurance policies. I watched his face change concern, shifting to professional assessment, shifting to something harder, colder. 2 full minutes of silence. Then he pulled latex gloves from his jacket pocket, he always carried them, and picked up the first poison bottle, read the label, set it down, picked up the will, read the signature, compared it to my driver's license when I slid it across the table. He examined every document with the same methodical care I'd seen him use at crime scenes. The shell company registration on my phone, the insurance policies, the mortgage with its clever auction clause. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes that had seen too many terrible things to be shocked anymore. "This is your daughter," he said quietly. "Are you absolutely sure you want me to take this to the station?" Quentin looked at me across that table, covered in evidence against my daughter, and asked if I was sure, and I realized there's a kind of love that knows when to let go, even if letting go means watching your child face consequences you can't protect them from. "I know," I said. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped somewhere between finding the bottles and making the call. "That's why I called you." He nodded slowly. "This is enough for an arrest warrant. Grand larceny and systemic forgery. Fraud, forgery. She'll be charged by this afternoon." "I understand." "Harold." He set down the insurance policy he'd been holding. "Once I take this in, I can't undo it. This becomes official. There's no going back." "She tried to kill me," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, too big and too small at the same time. "She poisoned Evander by accident, but the soup was meant for me. These documents prove it. The bottles prove it. Everything here proves it." "Yes," Quentin said. "It does." "Then there's nothing to undo." He pulled out his phone, started taking photographs. Each piece of evidence documented from multiple angles, timestamps automatically recorded chain of custody beginning. "I'll need you to come to the station later this morning," he said between shots. "Official statement, timeline of discovery, your signature on the evidence log. Whatever you need." He worked in silence for another 10 minutes, bagging each item in clear evidence bags he pulled from his car, labeling them in permanent marker with case numbers I didn't understand. When he finished, he stood across from me with a cardboard box full of my daughter's crimes. "I'm sorry," he said. "Me too." He left at 3:15 in the morning. I watched his taillights disappear down my street, carrying evidence that would destroy what remained of my family. I didn't sleep, just sat at the kitchen table watching the sun come up through the window above the sink, thinking about Paloma at 7 years old, at 15, at her wedding at Tuesday morning, with a pot of soup and a smile. Quentin called at 9 o'clock. "Harold, the pharmacy manager, found something. Paloma's ID was used 3 times, not once." I closed my eyes. 3 times over how long? 2 weeks. October 28th. November. 1st November 5th. She reported the ID lost on November 6th, the day after her last access. I did the math in my head. October 28th to November 5th. 8 days between first and last theft. 9 empty bottles total. 3 times. October 28th, November 1st, November 5th. She'd been stealing poison for 2 weeks while sitting at my dinner table, smiling, asking about the shop, planning my death in careful stages. That this was an impulse, I said. No, Quentin agreed. This was premeditated, calculated, patient. I hung up the phone and sat there in my kitchen doing the math. 2 weeks of planning, 3 separate thefts, 9 empty bottles in her room. She hadn't acted on impulse or desperation. She'd been patient, methodical, calculating. The question that haunted me wasn't whether she'd done it anymore. It was how long she'd been the kind of person who could. By Wednesday afternoon, I would have to face her one more time before Quentin made the arrest. Wednesday afternoon arrived with the weight of bureaucracy official statements, evidence logs, investigators confirming what my heart already knew, but my mind still struggled to accept. The question of when Paloma became capable of murder would be answered in a police station meeting room at 2 o'clock, when an insurance investigator opened her files and showed me exactly how long my daughter had been planning to kill me. Simone Webb sat across from Quentin and me at a metal table that had probably hosted 1,000 confessions. She was the same woman who'd testified at preliminary hearings, the one who'd flagged the policies that started unraveling everything. Now, she spread documents between us like cards in a deadly hand of poker. Both policies were purchased July 15th, she said, pointing to application dates highlighted in yellow. She forged signatures, listed herself as beneficiary, paid premiums from a checking account in her name alone, not the joint account she shares with Mr. Garrett. I stared at the date. July 15th, 2023. July, I whispered. 4 months ago. She was planning this before I even noticed anything wrong. Simone nodded. The forgery is expert level. She practiced extensively, probably traced your signatures from old documents, refined the muscle memory, until even you couldn't tell the difference. She laid out signature comparison charts, my real signature from my driver's license, the forged signature from the insurance application. Side by side, they were nearly identical. Neither insured party ever contacted the company directly, Simone continued. All communication went through Mrs. Garrett. She set up automatic premium payments, handled all correspondence, ensured you'd never receive policy confirmation in the mail. Quentin leaned forward. This timeline is crucial for prosecution. Can you testify to the forgery analysis? Waits dieses stan, errated excites. Already prepared to, Simone said. This level of premeditation, 4 months of planning, systematic fraud, dual targeting, shows clear intent. No jury will see this as impulse. 4 months, while I'd been worried about Paloma working too hard, eating too little, stressed about bills she'd been forging insurance policies and calculating the value of my life. I left the police station at 3:30 and drove straight to the hospital. Evander was awake when I arrived at 4 o'clock. Really awake this time, sitting up in his ICU bed, reading his own medical chart with a doctor's analytical eyes. The oxygen mask was gone, replaced by nasal cannula. His color had improved from concrete gray to something approaching human. Dad, he said when he saw me, not surprised, just tired. I told him everything. The basement discovery, 9 poison bottles, forged will, fake mortgage, dual insurance policies purchased in July 4 months ago. He listened the way he'd been trained to listen to patient histories. No interruption, no visible reaction, taking in data to form diagnosis. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. 4 months, he finally said. She kissed me goodnight while planning to collect insurance on my death. As the soup was meant for me, I said. You weren't supposed to. Doesn't matter who the target was, Dad. He cut me off, voice flat and clinical. Matters that she pulled the trigger. Watching my son-in-law process his wife's betrayal with clinical detachment like a doctor reading lab results that happened to spell out his own death sentence, I understood we were both protecting ourselves, the only way left by treating this as a case, not a family. Does Paloma know you found the evidence? He asked. I shook my head. Good. Don't tell her. Let Quentin handle the arrest. He looked at Dr. Finch, who nodded slightly. Less risk of flight or evidence destruction if she thinks you're still in the dark. Even now, even poisoned and hospitalized, he was thinking strategically, protecting the case, ensuring justice. Maybe that's what love looked like when it had nowhere else to go. I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot at 6 o'clock when my phone rang. Quentin, Harold, it's done. We took her into custody at Riverside Pharmacy 20 minutes ago. I didn't respond. Couldn't find words that fit what I was feeling. Harold, you there? Was she... I cleared my throat. Did she resist? No, she asked if you were the one who turned her in. I told her yes. I closed my eyes. What did she say? Nothing, just looked at the floor. Okay. You did the right thing, Quentin said quietly. I know. I hung up and sat there in the parking lot for 15 minutes. Engine off. November, cold seeping through the windows. Watching hospital staff come and go through automatic doors. People visiting sick relatives, doctors, starting night shifts. The ordinary machinery of life continuing while mine ground to a halt. I started the car intending to drive home. Instead, I found myself heading downtown, then turning onto Tillman Road, then parking across the street from Bell's Auto Repair. The shop sat dark. I hadn't been there since Tuesday morning, a lifetime ago, when I had received Paloma's poison soup and thought it was love. Through the front window, I could see the interior lit by street lamps tools organized on pegboards exactly how I'd left them. Renee's photo on the desk, oil stains on the concrete floor that 40 years of work had earned. The next morning I would wake knowing I had to face her one more time, not as father and daughter, but as witness and accused. Wanda arrived at my door Thursday evening, without calling, first the way family does when words aren't enough, and presence is all they can offer. I'd been sitting in the dark living room since coming home from the shop, still asking that question. Where did I go wrong when her knock pulled me back to the present? She stood on my porch with no casserole, no flowers from her shop, just herself, and the understanding that some nights you just needed someone who remembered your wife. Harold, she said. Nothing else, just my name. I let her in. Wanda Shelton was 62 Renee's older sister by 4 years, a florist who'd owned her own shop downtown for 30 years. She sat with me past midnight because she understood grief didn't follow visiting hours. We ended up at the kitchen table with chamomile tea. Neither of us drank steam rising in the silence between us. I keep thinking I missed something, I said finally. Some sign, some moment when I could have, I don't know, fixed it. Wanda looked at me with eyes that were Renee's eyes, same shape, same color, different life behind them. Renee knew Harold. The words hit like a fist. Knew what? She saw how Paloma measured everything in value, not meaning, but she loved her anyway. I set down my teacup carefully, afraid I'd drop it. What are you talking about? Wanda sighed, and I could see her deciding whether to protect me from this or trust me with the truth. She chose truth. Paloma was 7 the first time Renee called me, worried, Wanda said. They'd been at a birthday party, one of the neighbor kids. Paloma counted every present the birthday girl got, then came home and asked why her birthday parties never had that many gifts. Not sad, not jealous exactly, just calculating. She was 7, I said. Kids notice things. She asked why our house was smaller than her cousin's, why her Christmas gifts cost less than her friends' hauls. She kept a notebook, Harold, at 9 years old, listed what other kids got for birthdays, holidays, tooth fairy, compared it to what she got. I remembered that notebook. Paloma had called it her wish list. Renee and I had thought it was cute. Renee showed it to me once, Wanda continued. It wasn't wishes, it was accounting. Dollar amounts estimated next to each item, running totals at the bottom of each page. Why didn't Renee tell me? Why didn't she say something was wrong? Because Renee believed love could fix it, that if she just loved Paloma enough, the calculating would soften into caring. Wanda's voice cracked. She told me, she's practical, not cruel. She'll outgrow it. Sitting in that kitchen where Renee had made 1,000 meals, I understood what Wanda was really telling me. My wife had carried this knowledge alone, choosing hope over warning, and died before seeing if love would be enough. It wasn't enough, I whispered. No, Wanda agreed. It wasn't. She stayed until 11, then hugged me at the door, a long hug that said what words couldn't. After she left, I sat in Renee's chair and thought about my wife, seeing signs I'd missed loving our daughter anyway, hoping against evidence that maternal devotion would cure what was actually character. Friday morning, at 9 o'clock, I walked into the interrogation room at Fort Wayne Police Department. Paloma sat at a metal table in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed to a ring, bolted to the surface. Dexter Townsend sat beside her, a public defender, 51, with graying hair and tired eyes. He'd pulled me aside before we entered and told me honestly that my daughter was afraid, but not remorseful. The distinction mattered. Quentin stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching. I sat across from Paloma in the metal chair that had probably held 1,000 people confronting 1,000 awful truths. She looked at me. I looked at her. No tears, no apologies, just assessment. "Why Paloma?" I asked. My voice was steady. I'd used up all my tears somewhere between the basement and now. "Just tell me why you thought this was the answer." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said in a voice as flat and emotionless as a tax form, "Because I watched Mom die without ever owning anything. 30 years working at that school, and we still rented. She left me nothing but medical debt." The words landed like stones. "Your mother left you love," I said. "She left you—" "Love doesn't pay bills, Dad." She leaned forward as much as the cuffs allowed. "I won't live like that. I won't spend 30 years working myself to death for nothing." "So you decided to kill me for the shop, for insurance money." "I decided to secure my future," she said. No shame, no recognition that she was describing murder like it was retirement planning. "Evander makes decent money now, but it's not enough. The shop was sitting there. The insurance was easy to arrange. It made sense." She blamed Renee for being poor, blamed me for not making us rich, used the woman we both loved as justification for murder. "Your mother would be—" "My mother would understand," Paloma cut me off. "She worked herself to death for pennies. She'd understand not wanting to end up the same way. She wouldn't understand grand larceny and systemic forgery." Paloma shrugged, actually shrugged. "We'll never know, will we?" Dexter Townsend cleared his throat. "Harold, I think—" "Did you ever love me?" I asked. "Or was I always just an asset on a spreadsheet?" For the first time, something flickered across Paloma's face. Not remorse, not guilt, just consideration. Like she was actually thinking about the question from a business perspective. "I don't know," she said finally. "Does it matter?" I looked at my daughter across that metal table and tried to find something I recognized, a flicker of the girl who'd learned to count with socket wrenches, who'd cried when her goldfish died at 8, who'd hugged me at Renee's funeral. There was nothing. Just a 30-year-old woman in an orange jumpsuit who'd valued my life at $2 million and felt no shame. What I didn't know yet was that Paloma's plan had failed in ways she couldn't have predicted. That Friday afternoon, Quentin called with news that would transform tragedy into absurdist theater. Paloma had destroyed everything for a plan that was already dead. I left the interrogation room feeling hollowed out, my daughter's shameless words still echoing in my head. She didn't see me as a father. She saw me as a balance sheet, $2 million walking around in human form. Quentin caught up with me in the hallway. "Harold, my office, there's something you need to hear." We walked past holding cells and evidence rooms to his small office on the second floor. He closed the door, gestured for me to sit, and dialed a number on speakerphone. "Margaret Hollis, First Federal Bank Fraud Division." A woman's voice answered. "Ms. Hollis, this is Inspector Riddle. I have Harold Bell with me. Can you repeat what you told me this morning?" Margaret Hollis was a senior fraud analyst at First Federal Bank, and she explained in flat professional tones how their algorithm had saved my assets while I'd been completely unaware. "Our system flagged the mortgage filing as fraudulent Sunday morning," she said. "November 3rd, the filing showed suspicious characteristics. Shell company creditor property owner never contacted us directly. Signature analysis showed statistical anomalies. Sunday," I repeated. "Our security system placed a silent administrative hold on the file by Monday afternoon." She continued. "Standard protocol before a full freeze. We were scheduled to call you directly on Tuesday morning to verify your signature, completely unaware that the poisoning was already in motion." I looked at Quentin. He nodded slowly. "Monday," I said. My voice sounded strange. "She poisoned the soup Tuesday. You're saying the whole plan was already dead." Quentin finished. "Even if you died, even if Evander had died, she would have gotten nothing. The bank would have held everything pending fraud investigation. The fake will would have been flagged. The insurance companies would have launched their own investigations. Every single piece of her plan had already collapsed." "We would have contacted you Monday," Margaret said, "but we wanted to complete our analysis first. We were planning to call Tuesday morning. Then we heard about the poisoning and contacted police instead." I sat there in Quentin's office trying to process it. Sunday, the bank's computers had noticed what we hadn't. Monday, while I was opening my shop and making coffee and texting Evander about resting after his shift, my accounts were being frozen to protect me from fraud I didn't know existed. Tuesday morning, Paloma had arrived with soup and a smile pouring poison meant for me not knowing her 4-month plan had died 48 hours earlier. 4 months planning, 3 warehouse break-ins, 9 poison bottles stolen, 2 insurance policies, 1 forged will. And it was all worthless before she ever poured the powder into that soup. She destroyed her life for nothing, I whispered. Not nothing, Quentin corrected. She destroyed it for greed. The fact that the greed was pointless doesn't make it less real. I thanked Margaret Hollis and left Quentin's office, drove home, sat in my living room trying to find meaning in the absurdity. Paloma had calculated every step forged, every document, stolen every vial of poison, and none of it had mattered. A bank algorithm had stopped her before she'd even started. If tragedy could be darkly funny, this would have been hilarious. Instead, it was just sad. The following Tuesday, 1 week after the poisoning, 1 week after my life had split into before and after, I drove to Allen County Hospital to bring Evander home. He walked slowly down the corridor toward the hospital entrance, still weak, moving like a man learning to trust his body again. Dr. Ilaria walked beside him, professional courtesy that felt like something more. At the automatic doors, she stopped. "Take care of yourself, Evander," she said. Her hand rested on his shoulder, lingered there a moment longer than necessary. "You have my number if you need anything. Anything at all." Her emphasis on those last 2 words wasn't medical. Evander nodded. "Thank you, Dr. Finch, for everything." "Ilaria," she said quietly. "Outside the hospital, it's Ilaria." He smiled, small, tired, but real. "Ilaria." She stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself, but not before I saw something pass between them. Recognition. Possibility. The kind of look that happens when 2 people realize they might want to know each other better. Evander glanced back at her before sliding into my passenger seat. We drove in silence for 5 minutes past the hospital complex onto DuPont Road, heading toward my house where Evander would stay during recovery. His house, the one he'd shared with Paloma, was still a crime scene evidence tape across the door. "Do you think it's possible," he asked suddenly, "to forgive someone who tried to kill you for money?" I thought about it, really thought. "I don't know if I can forgive Paloma for what she did to you," I said honestly. "I don't know if you should, but you don't have to decide today." "She was my wife," he said. "For 8 years. I loved her. I thought she loved me." "Maybe she did," I said. "Maybe people can love someone and still be willing to destroy them for money. I don't understand it. But maybe it's possible. Or maybe I never really knew her," Evander said quietly. Neither of us did. Watching Evander look back at Dr. Ilaria, that quick glance, that small connection, I realized grief doesn't end when tragedy does. It just makes room eventually for other things. Evander stared out the car window the rest of the drive home, and I knew he was thinking about Ilaria, the way her hand had rested on his shoulder, the way she'd said anything at all, with meaning that went beyond medical care. In the ruins of his marriage, something small and careful was beginning to grow. I didn't say anything. Some things you have to let people discover for themselves. But before any of us could move forward, we had to navigate the legal machinery that would determine how many years Paloma would spend behind bars. The question Dexter asked me 3 weeks after my daughter's arrest was simple. Could I show mercy to someone who'd shown me none? Life was finding a rhythm, however broken. Evander was recovering at my house, his kidney function stable at 85% permanent damage, but livable. I'd seen him texting someone late at night, smiling at his phone, in a way he hadn't smiled at Paloma in years. I didn't ask. Some things needed privacy to grow. 3 weeks after the poisoning, late November, Dexter Townsend called, requesting a meeting. We met at the district court law, offices me, Dexter, and Quentin sitting as witness. Dexter spread documents across the conference table like he was dealing cards. "The DA is offering 12 years parole eligibility at 8 if you and Evander sign a joint petition for leniency," he said. No preamble, just facts. 12 years, I repeated. With good behavior, she could be out in 8. Without the petition, they're pushing for 20. I looked at the petition. Legal language about rehabilitation, potential family support, mitigating circumstances. All the words that meant asking the court to go easier on someone who tried to murder 2 people for money. "Does she regret it, Dexter?" I asked. "Not the getting caught, the doing it. Does my daughter regret trying to kill me?" Dexter had been a public defender long enough to recognize when honesty mattered more than spin. "She's terrified of prison," he said carefully. "But remorse no herald. I don't think she understands remorse." Quentin shifted in his chair. "You don't have to sign this. The DA has enough evidence to convict without your cooperation. I know, I said. I picked up the pen. Dexter watched me. You're sure? She's my daughter, I said. That doesn't change because she's also a criminal. I can be her father and still want justice. I can show mercy and still know she's guilty. Those things can all be true at the same time. I signed my name on that petition, knowing my daughter had tried to kill me for money, knowing she didn't regret it, knowing I was choosing to be her father anyway, and the pen didn't shake because some decisions you make with your heart, not your head. Evander already signed his copy this morning, Dexter said quietly. You're both choosing mercy. We're both choosing to be better than she was, I corrected. Before I show you the detail that made everything worse, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think this case took weeks to plan, or B, if you think months, and tell me in one sentence what makes you guess that. Please note, what follows contains recreated courtroom testimony for narrative clarity, though the timeline dates are factual. 2 months after the poisoning, early January 2024, I sat in the gallery at Allen County Courthouse for Paloma's preliminary hearing. Judge Irving Sinclair presided, 61 years old, with 3 decades on the bench, the kind of judge who'd seen every variation of human cruelty and still managed to look disappointed by new lows. The prosecutor was methodical, building the case piece by piece. Pharmacy theft logs, forged documents, insurance fraud, bank records. The prosecutor called Brenda Vance, a former legal secretary from the downtown estate planning office, to the stand. She had no ties to the defense team, but her old appointment logs held the key to the timeline. Ms. Vance, the prosecutor began. When exactly did the defendant first book a consultation regarding estate planning services? Ms. Vance looked straight at the jury. May 7, 2023. May 7 months before the poisoning. And what specific services did she inquire about? She asked about will execution beneficiary designation and probate timelines for sudden death. The courtroom was quiet. I could hear the court reporter's fingers on the stenograph, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Sudden death, the prosecutor repeated. Those were her words. Yes. Did she specify whose sudden death? Her father's. She said she wanted to be prepared in case something happened to him. I sat there doing math I didn't want to do. That same week she'd met with a lawyer to plan my death. And did the defendant, the prosecutor continued, express any concern about her father's health at that time? No, she described him as healthy. She said she was just being practical. That word again, practical. The same word Renee had used, hoping it would soften into caring. It never had. 6 months, 24 Sunday dinners, 180 days of smiling and laughing and asking how my diabetes test went, all while pricing my death. The prosecutor entered the consultation records into evidence. Dated May 7th, 2023. 7 months of premeditation. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, this timeline proves beyond doubt that we're looking at extensive premeditation, not a crime of passion or desperation. The defendant spent half a year planning, preparing, and positioning herself to profit from murder. Judge Sinclair read the victim impact statements Evander and I had written. Read them twice, I noticed. Then he looked at Paloma, sitting at the defense table in her orange jumpsuit. The court acknowledges the leniency petition. He said, we'll take it under advisement during sentencing. I walked out of that courthouse doing math. I wish I'd never learned 6 months of planning meant she'd started this before. Summer had been calculating my murder through every family barbecue, every phone call, every "I love you, Dad" she'd said since May. The question that haunted me wasn't how she'd done it anymore. It was how she'd looked me in the eye for 6 months while doing it. But before I could process that timeline, Evander had news that would complicate everything. 6 weeks after learning my daughter had planned my murder for half a year, I smiled for the first time because my son-in-law was learning to hope again. The answer to how Paloma had looked me in the eye while plotting my death never came. Maybe there was no answer. Maybe she'd simply learned to separate what she felt from what she wanted and wanting won. I'd stopped asking questions that had no good answers. Life was moving forward whether I was ready or not. 6 weeks after the poisoning, mid-December, Evander knocked on my door at 7 in the evening. He'd been staying with me since his discharge, sleeping in the guest room, slowly regaining strength. His color had improved. He'd started eating normally again. The tremor in his hands from nerve damage was mostly gone. But tonight he looked nervous in a different way. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." We sat in the living room. I waited. Dr. Finch asked me to coffee. he said finally. Not a date. She was very clear about that. Just, she said I shouldn't process this alone, that talking to someone outside the family might help. Are you going to go? He looked at his hands. I don't know if I can trust my judgment anymore. I married Paloma. I lived with her for 8 years and didn't see what she was. How do I trust myself to see people clearly? You saw Paloma clearly, I said. You saw who she pretended to be. That's not a failure of judgment, that's her being a convincing liar. It still feels like my fault. It's not. I leaned forward. Dr. Finch saved your life. She's been checking on you even when she didn't have to. That's real. Whatever her invitation means or doesn't mean, it's coming from someone who's shown you genuine care. You think I should go? I think you should do what feels right. But yeah, I think you should go. She's direct, honest, and she literally brought you back from the dead. That's a hell of a foundation for anything friendship, conversation, or whatever it becomes. He smiled then, small, uncertain, but real. When's the coffee date? I asked. Tomorrow. She works second shift, suggested we meet at 3. Then go. Be nervous. Be honest about being nervous. See what happens. Watching Evander talk about Dr. Finch, nervous, hopeful, scared, I realized grief doesn't get to have the final word. Life keeps insisting on itself, finding cracks to grow through even in the hardest ground. That was the first time I'd smiled since this whole nightmare began. Not a big smile, not happy exactly, but hopeful. Seeing someone I loved consider a future beyond tragedy. 2 months after the poisoning, early January, I sat alone in Bell's Auto Repair after closing. The asset freeze had finally been lifted. The bank's investigation was complete. The shop was legally mine again, free and clear of Paloma's fraudulent mortgage. I could do whatever I wanted with it. I walked through the garage bay, running my hand along the tool bench I'd built in 1993. Renee's photo still sat on my desk, the 23rd anniversary, her last birthday before the cancer diagnosis. Paloma's childhood drawings were still in the filing cabinet, crayon sketches of cars, stick figures labeled Dad and Mom, a lopsided heart that said, I love the shop. 30 years I'd poured into this place. 30 years of oil changes and brake jobs and transmission rebuilds. 30 years of customer relationships, of teaching my daughter to count, using socket wrenches, of building something with my hands that would last. And I couldn't work here anymore. Every tool reminded me of teaching Paloma. Every socket wrench was a memory of her small hands learning to sort them by size. Every oil stain on the concrete floor was a Saturday morning when she'd helped me gotten dirty, laughed when Renee pretended to be horrified by their matching grease-stained clothes. I couldn't separate Bell's Auto Repair from the daughter who'd grown up here, and I couldn't separate that daughter from the woman who'd planned my murder for 6 months. 30 years I built you, I said to the empty shop. Taught my daughter to count here, and I can't look at these walls without seeing her planning my murder. I sat down at my desk, opened the filing cabinet, and pulled out Paloma's financial records, the ones Quentin had given me after the arrest. Gambling debts, $43,000. Credit cards, $28,000. Personal loans, $15,000. $86,000 in debt that would follow her when she got out of prison. Creditors who'd sue, garnish wages, make her life hell for years. I looked at Renee's photo. She's still our daughter, I said. Even in prison, even after everything, someone has to make sure she's safe when she gets out. Renee would have wanted that. Renee had always believed in second chances, in loving people through their worst choices, in being the parent your child needed even when they didn't deserve it. The shop or my daughter, I whispered to myself. There's only one choice a father can make. What is a father, if not someone who protects his child, even when she doesn't deserve it, even when protection means sacrificing everything you built? The shop would sell for maybe $280,000, enough to pay her debts, set aside money for her. When she was released, maybe help with rent and living expenses while she rebuilt her life. I'd be 68 by then, too old to start over with another shop. I'd retire early, live on Social Security and the small amount left over. But Paloma would be free of the debt that had driven her to poison in the first place. Maybe this time, without the pressure, without the desperation, she'd make different choices. Maybe not. But I'd have done what a father does, given my child a chance. I turned off the shop lights for what I knew would be the last time, as owner stood in the darkness, listening to 30 years of echoes, Renee's laughter, Paloma's childhood, questions, the hum of engines and the clank of tools. Then I locked the door and walked to my car carrying nothing but the decision. Tomorrow I'd call the real estate agent. Tonight I'd let myself grieve what I was about to lose. But before I could list the shop, the trial date arrived, and with it, the moment I'd have to stand in court and speak the truth about my daughter to the world. I did call the real estate agent the next morning, listed the shop for $275,000, signed papers I'd never imagined signing. But before the sale could close, before I could pay off Paloma's debts and give her that undeserved second chance, the trial date arrived. 4 months after the poisoning, April 2024, I walked into Allen County Courthouse and saw my daughter in chains. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the back rows, notebooks ready. Spectators who'd followed the case in the news sat shoulder to shoulder, hungry for the drama of a daughter who tried to murder her father for money. I recognized neighbors, customers from the shop, people from Renee's old school. They all turned to look when I entered. I kept my eyes forward and found a seat in the gallery. Paloma sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled to a chain around her waist. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by incarceration. Dexter Townsend sat beside her pen, moving rapidly across a yellow legal pad, preparing for battle he knew he'd already lost. Paloma didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence, just stared straight ahead at Judge Irving Sinclair's empty bench. The bailiff called out, "All rise." Judge Sinclair entered, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the severe expression of someone who'd presided over too many tragedies to be surprised by human cruelty anymore. He sat, arranged his files, and looked out over the courtroom with the weariness of a man doing necessary work. "Be seated," he said. The rustle of 100 people sitting filled the silence. "The State of Indiana versus Paloma Marie Bell." Judge Sinclair read from his docket. Case number 2024-CR-00847. We're here for trial on charges of grand larceny and systemic forgery in the first-degree forgery insurance fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. Is the prosecution ready? Yes, Your Honor. Is the defense ready? Dexter stood. Yes, Your Honor. Then let's begin. The prosecutor, a woman in her 50s whose name I'd already forgotten, stood and began reading the charges. Her voice was clear, professional, devastating. Grand larceny and systemic forgery in the first degree. That on or about November 7, 2023, the defendant Paloma Marie Bell did willfully and with premeditation attempt to cause the death of Harold Eugene Bell by means of poisoning. I watched Paloma's face. Nothing. No reaction. Her hands folded on the table posture, perfect expression, blank. Forgery. That the defendant did knowingly and fraudulently forge the signature of Harold Eugene Bell on documents, including, but not limited to, a last will and testament. Still nothing. Insurance fraud. That the defendant did knowingly file false insurance claims. Dexter scribbled notes. Paloma stared ahead. Conspiracy to commit fraud. I noticed the smell then, floor polish and old wood, the institutional scent of courtrooms and government buildings. It reminded me of my father's funeral decades ago, another day I'd sat in formal silence while my world collapsed around me. The prosecutor called her first witness. The state calls Simone Webb. Simone stepped to the witness stand. I'd met her during the investigation, a woman in her 40s wearing a navy blazer, her expression professional and unreadable, the kind of face that had delivered bad news 1,000 times before. She was sworn in and sat. "Ms. Webb," the prosecutor began, "please state your occupation." "I'm a senior fraud investigator for Guardian Life Insurance Company." "And in that capacity, did you investigate insurance policies related to this case?" "I did." "What did you find?" Simone opened a file folder. "I found 3 separate life insurance policies, all filed around July 15, 2023, all listing Paloma Bell as sole beneficiary. 3, not 1. 3. I felt the air leave my lungs. 3 policies," the prosecutor repeated for the jury's benefit. "Can you describe them?" Policy 1, insured party Harold Eugene Bell, death benefit $2 million. Policy 2, insured party Evander James Garrett, death benefit $1.5 million. Policy 3, additional coverage on Evander Garrett, death benefit $1 million. The courtroom murmured. Someone behind me whispered something I couldn't hear. "And what irregularities did you discover?" All 3 policies showed forged signatures. The beneficiary designations had been altered after the fact, changed from original beneficiaries to Paloma Bell exclusively. Digital timestamps showed the changes were made in October 2023, backdated to appear as if they'd been filed months earlier. Did either insured party Harold Bell or Evander Garrett authorize these changes? No, neither party had any contact with our company. All communications came through Paloma Bell, who claimed to be acting as their authorized agent. The prosecutor nodded. Let's look at the documents. The courtroom screen flickered to life. Insurance applications appeared one after another. I saw my signature forged perfect, indistinguishable from my real one. Saw Evander's signature beside it. The courtroom murmured. Someone behind me whispered something I couldn't hear. And what irregularities did you discover? All 3 policies showed forged signatures. The total fraudulent claim value amounted to $4.5 million, all directed to Paloma Bell as the sole beneficiary. My hands started trembling so badly I had to grip the bench in front of me to keep them still. I was aware of reporters in the gallery watching me, as much as they were watching Paloma, documenting my reactions for tomorrow's headlines. Ms. Webb, the prosecutor said, "Can you tell the court the total fraudulent claim value?" Oh, Simone looked at her notes, though I suspected she'd memorized the number. Before the whispers in the room could die down, the prosecutor called my name. My legs barely carried me toward the witness stand. Walking across the floor, I felt every eye tracking my movement, every heavy silence assessing whether I had been blind or simply complicit. The bailiff swore at me. I placed my hand on the Bible and promised to tell the truth. As if I knew what the truth was anymore. "Mr. Bell," the prosecutor said gently, "take your time." I'd written a statement, 2 pages single-spaced, every word carefully chosen. It sat in my lap now, the paper trembling with my hands. I looked at it, looked at Paloma sitting 20 feet away, her face still blank. I set the statement aside. "Paloma is my daughter," I said. My voice cracked on the word daughter. I cleared my throat, continued. "I taught her to ride a bike when she was 6, read her bedtime stories every night until she was 10, and told me she was too old. I was there when her mother, Renee, died, held her while she cried, and promised her we'd get through it together." The courtroom was silent. "I don't know where I went wrong," I said. "I've asked myself that question every day for 4 months. Did I spoil her? Did I not discipline enough? Did I fail to teach her right from wrong?" I paused, looked at the prepared statement again. The words blurred. "Maybe I didn't go wrong," I continued. "Maybe people make choices and love isn't enough to stop them. Maybe I could have been the perfect father, and she still would have chosen this. I don't know. I'll probably never know." I couldn't look at her while I spoke. If I had, I would have broken completely. "What I do know is this: she's still my daughter. That doesn't excuse what she did. It doesn't make it hurt less. It doesn't change the fact that she tried to kill me for money and nearly killed her husband instead. But it's true. She's still my daughter." I looked at Judge Sinclair. "I ask this court for neither harsh punishment nor excessive leniency, just truth. Whatever sentence you give it won't change what happened. It won't give me back the shop I'm selling to pay her debts. It won't give Evander back his health or his marriage. It won't answer the questions that keep me awake at night. But it will be true, and truth is the only thing I have left to ask for." I stepped down, walked back to my seat on legs that barely held me. The prosecutor called Evander next. He walked to the stand, slowly, still moving, like someone whose body had betrayed him. He'd gained back most of the weight he'd lost, but there was a fragility to him now that hadn't been there before the poisoning. He wasn't sworn in for victim impact, just asked to speak. He stood at the witness stand. No paper, no prepared remarks. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding ring. The courtroom held its breath. Evander placed the ring on the witness stand rail. The small gold band caught the overhead lights gleaming against the dark wood. He looked at Paloma, 1 second, maybe 2. Then he looked away. "I signed the leniency petition," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "because I thought I knew this woman. I thought 8 years of marriage meant something. I thought the person I'd loved, the person I'd built a life with, was still in there somewhere." He paused. "But I don't know her. I don't think I ever did. And 12 years in prison won't teach her who I am. It'll teach her what she did. I hope that's enough. I hope 12 years is enough for her to understand that love isn't something you measure in dollar amounts." Paloma's face changed. For the first time since the trial began, something moved behind her eyes. Not tears, not remorse, but something. A crack in the mask. Evander left the ring on the stand and walked back to his seat. The ring sat on the stand like a small silver headstone, marking the death of their marriage. Judge Sinclair cleared his throat. "The court will now render its decision," he said. "Paloma Marie Bell, please rise." Paloma stood. Dexter stood beside her. This court has carefully considered the evidence, the testimony, and the victim impact statements provided by both your father and your husband. The prosecution has asked for 20 years. The defense has requested 8. The leniency petition signed by both victims request measured justice. He looked at Paloma over his wire-rimmed glasses. What you did was calculated, premeditated, and motivated purely by greed. You spent 6 months planning to murder your father for money. When that plan was discovered by the bank's fraud detection, you didn't stop. You proceeded anyway, poisoning soup meant for him, and nearly killing your husband instead. Paloma stood rigid. However, this court has considered the victims and the victim's father-in-law's requests for measured justice. Both men, despite having every right to demand the maximum sentence, have asked this court to show restraint. Judge Sinclair picked up his gavel. The court sentences you to 12 years in the Indiana Department of Correction, eligible for parole after 8 years served. You will also be required to make restitution for all financial fraud, though the court notes your father has voluntarily assumed those debts. The gavel came down. 12 years. Paloma didn't react, didn't cry, didn't speak. Just stood there as 2 officers approached with handcuffs. They led her toward the courtroom doors. And then she stopped. Just for 1 second she stopped and looked back, not at the courtroom, not at Evander, but directly at me. Her face held something I couldn't name. Regret, defiance, apology, hatred. Then she turned and walked through the doors, and I never got my answer. The courtroom emptied, leaving me alone with a question I would carry for years. That night alone in the house where I'd raised her, I couldn't stop shaking. I'd never gotten my answer. Maybe there was no answer. Maybe that look, regret or defiance or apology or hatred, was just another thing Paloma would take with her to prison, leaving me to wonder for the rest of my life what she'd been thinking in that final second before the doors closed. The courthouse steps had been endless. Reporters shouted questions I didn't hear. Cameras flashed. Someone grabbed my arm. A journalist wanting a quote about how it felt to see my daughter sentenced. I pulled away and kept walking. I drove home in silence. Now it was midnight, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed, still wearing the suit I'd worn to court, unable to make myself move. I opened the bedside drawer looking for nothing in particular. Just movement. Just something to do with my shaking hands. The envelope was underneath old receipts and a broken watch cream-colored paper, my name written in Renee's handwriting across the front. Below my name in smaller letters, read when you feel your darkest. I stared at it. I'd seen this envelope before years ago, but I'd never opened it. Renee had told me about it a week before she died, between morphine doses when she was still lucid. When you're at your lowest, she'd said. Not before. You'll know when. I knew when. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Renee's handwriting filled a single page dated 3 years ago, written in the hospital during one of her better days. Hald, it began. If you're reading this, you're in great pain. I wish I could be there to hold you, but since I can't, these words will have to do. I could hear her voice in every sentence. You don't need to be okay. You don't need to be strong right now. You don't need to have answers or know what comes next. Just keep going. One day, then another, that's all. Just keep going. My vision blurred. Whatever happened to bring you to this letter, I'm sorry I wasn't there to help you through it. But I know you, Harold Bell. You're stronger than you think. You're kinder than you believe. And you'll survive this even if you can't imagine how right now. The letter ended simply, I love you, always. Renee. No mention of Paloma. No way she could have known that her daughter would be the source of this darkness. She'd just known that someday, somehow, I'd need these words. I read Renee's letter 3 times that night, trying to hear her voice in the words. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the drawer where I could find it again when I needed it. Just keep going. So I did. 6 months later, October 2024, Evander called me on a Sunday afternoon. Can we meet? He asked. There's something I need to tell you. We met at the hospital parking lot, where I'd picked him up after his discharge. Strange choice, but he'd said he had errands there anyway. He looked good, healthy. He'd gained back the weight, and the haunted look had faded from his eyes. The divorce had been finalized in August. Paloma had signed the papers from prison, without contest. I'm leaving Fort Wayne, he said. The words hit harder than I'd expected. Where? Columbus, Ohio. There's a hospital there, bigger, better opportunities. I need to start over somewhere that doesn't remind me of her every day. I understood. Fort Wayne was full of ghosts for both of us. When do you leave? Next week. I'm driving up Friday to find an apartment, then moving the following Monday. Watching Evander drive away felt like watching the last piece of my family disappear over the horizon. We stood there in the parking lot, and I realized I was losing him too. Not to poison or prison, but to distance and fresh starts and the very reasonable need to escape the place where his wife had tried to kill him. "You're still family to me," I said. "Distance doesn't change that." "I know." He pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Take care of yourself, Harold. Actually eat meals. Don't work too hard at the shop." "The shop sold last month," I said. "Closing is next week." His face showed surprise, then understanding. "You couldn't stay there either." "No." "What will you do?" "I don't know yet. Figure it out as I go." We stood there another minute, neither wanting to be the first to leave. Then Dr. Ilaria Finch walked out of the hospital. Entrance saw us and waved. She had a box in her arms, personal items from her office, it looked like. Evander waved back, then glanced at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She's leaving too," I asked. "New position. Columbus has a better trauma program." "The Columbus," I repeated. "Yeah." He looked at his shoes. "Same hospital I'm transferring to. Coincidence?" "Sure," I said. "Coincidence." He smiled, small, embarrassed, hopeful. The first real smile I'd seen from him since before the poisoning. Dr. Ilaria loaded her box into her car, then walked over. "Harold," she said, shaking my hand. "Good to see you." "You too. Evander tells me you're heading to Columbus." "Better opportunities," she said, professional, careful. But her eyes flicked to Evander for just a second. "I'm sure you'll both do great there," I said. Evander hugged me, one more time, got in his car, and drove away. I stood in that parking lot, watching his taillights disappear, feeling the weight of being alone settling over me like a blanket. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Evander, "Ilaria going the same way. Don't say anything." I stared at the message. Then, for the first time since the trial, I smiled, a small, fragile thing, but real. I texted back, "I won't. Be happy." His response came immediately, trying. Maybe not everything was lost after all. The day I signed away 40 years of my life took less than an hour. Not everything was lost. Evander had found something like hope in Columbus with Ilaria, and that knowledge kept me warm through the cold months that followed. But plenty was gone. The shop, my daughter, the life I'd built. November the 2024 arrived with gray skies and the kind of cold that settled into your bones. 1 year exactly since Paloma had brought me poisoned soup with a smile. The new owners arrived at Bell's Auto Repair at 9 in the morning, a young couple in their 30s with 2 kids and dreams bigger than their bank account. The husband was a mechanic who'd worked for someone else his whole career. This was his chance to build something for his family. I understood that dream. I'd lived there for 40 years. Wanda stood beside me as I handed over the keys. "Take good care of her," I said, my voice caught on the word her. "This place has been my whole life." "We will, Mr. Bell," the husband said, shaking my hand with genuine reverence. "We promise." His wife smiled, holding their youngest, a girl about 4 with dark pigtails. The older boy, maybe 7, was already exploring the garage bay, running his hands along the tool bench like it was treasure. I watched him and saw Paloma at that age doing the same thing, asking 1,000 questions about every socket and wrench. The paperwork was done. The money was already transferred to my account. Everything was legal and final. I walked through the shop one last time. Renee's photo still sat on my desk. I'd kept it there through the sale process, not ready to take it down until the absolute last moment. I picked it up, now ran my thumb across the glass, protecting her smile. "We did good here," I said to her. Most of it anyway. I placed the photo carefully in the box I'd brought. My old toolkit sat on the workbench, the same tools I'd used to build this business to teach my daughter to make a living for 4 decades. The new owner would get most of it as part of the sale. Good tools, still plenty of life left. But one wrench I kept. The 1/2-inch combination wrench, chrome and steel worn smooth, where hands had gripped it for years. Renee had used this one teaching Paloma when she was 8, showing her the difference between clockwise and counterclockwise. Right-hand wrench, left-hand wrench. Renee would say, making it a game. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Paloma had giggled, repeating it until she had it memorized. I held the wrench, now feeling its weight, and put it in my pocket. The smell of oil and metal and old coffee filled my lungs one last time. 40 years of that smell. 40 years of mornings starting here, afternoons bent over engines, evenings closing up, and heading home to Renee. Handing over those keys felt like signing my own death certificate. The business was the last thing tethering me to who I used to be. I walked out without looking back. Wanda drove me home in her car. We didn't talk. She understood. That afternoon, she sat with me in my living room while I tried to figure out what to do with myself. "You don't have to figure it out today," she said. "You just have to get through today." "I don't know who I am without that shop," I said. "You're Harold Bell, Renee's husband, Paloma's father, my friend. The shop was what you did. It's not who you are." She reached into her handbag and pulled out an envelope. "I've been carrying this for a week," she said, "trying to decide if I should give it to you. But I think you need to see it." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Old, the colors slightly faded, the corners soft with age. Paloma, at 7 years old, sat on a tire in the shop garage wearing miniature coveralls Renee had made for her. Her smile showed a missing front tooth. One small hand gripped the very wrench now sitting in my pocket. Renee stood beside her arm, around her shoulders, beaming with that proud mother smile that lit up every room she entered. "Renee kept this in her wallet for years," Wanda said quietly. "I found it in her things after she died. Thought maybe you'd want it now." I stared at the photo, unable to speak. "Look at that smile," Wanda continued. She was so happy that day. 7 years old, missing tooth, covered in grease she'd gotten from helping me change oil in a Honda Civic. Renee had pretended to be mad, then laughed and taken this picture because Paloma looked so proud of herself. I couldn't reconcile the grinning 7-year-old in the photo with the blank-faced woman the officers led away in shackles. "When did she change?" I asked. "When did that little girl become someone who could plan murder for 6 months?" "I don't know," Wanda said. "Maybe she didn't change. Maybe we just didn't see what was always there." "Renee saw," I said, remembering what Wanda had told me months ago about Paloma's calculating nature, even as a child. Renee knew and loved her anyway. "Yes," Wanda agreed. "She did." I held the photo looking at Renee's face, at Paloma's innocent smile, at the shop in the background that no longer belonged to me. Somewhere between that 7-year-old on a tire and the 30-year-old in prison, my daughter had made choices I'd never understand. Or maybe Wanda was right. Maybe the seeds were always there, and we'd just chosen not to see them. I stared at 7-year-old Paloma's missing tooth smile, her small hands gripping that wrench Renee's arm around her shoulders. "She's still there somewhere," I whispered to the empty room. "I don't know how to find her." The question would haunt me for years. The voicemail light was blinking when I woke up at 6:30 on a Thursday in October. I'd been awake most of the night anyway, the way I often was in that first apartment, lying in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a building that wasn't mine, pipes ticking, neighbors moving overhead, the distant complaint of a city that never fully slept. The shop had always been my anchor. Without it, mornings felt formless, like reaching for a wall that wasn't there. I lay still for a moment, watching the ceiling, then reached for my phone. The notification read, "Missed call, Indiana Department of Correction, Inmate Communication Services." I sat up slowly. She'd called at 11:40 the night before. I'd been asleep by 10, a small mercy that felt less merciful now. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then pressed play on the voicemail. Static first. The mechanical voice of an automated system reading a disclaimer I'd never heard before. Then a click like a door opening, somewhere deep inside a building I'd never see. Her voice came through flat and stripped down the way voices get when someone has spent months choosing words carefully because they know they might not get another chance to say them. "Dad." A pause. Not dramatic, just the kind that happens when someone is deciding where to begin. "It's Paloma. I won't ask you to pick up next time. I just wanted to say something while I still knew how to say it." The background noise was institutional, a low murmur of other voices, the distant clang of something metal, the particular silence that exists inside large buildings made of concrete. I pressed the phone against my ear, as though being closer to it could bring her closer to me. "I've been trying to write you a letter for 4 months, she continued. "I've thrown away maybe 30 drafts. Every time I write 'I'm sorry,' it sounds like I'm trying to get something, like I'm still calculating, and I don't want to do that anymore." I got up from the bed and walked to the window, without thinking the way you move toward light when something difficult is happening. I remembered something last week. I must have been 8 or 9. You and Mom were fixing someone's Honda in the shop on a Saturday. I was supposed to be doing homework at the front desk, but I kept watching you two work together. Mom handed you tools. Without you asking, she just knew which one you needed. You'd reach back and she'd already be putting the right wrench in your hand. I closed my eyes. I thought that was the most ordinary thing in the world, Paloma said. That's what I thought marriage was, two people who knew each other well enough to hand each other the right thing at the right time. I never told you that. I don't know why I'm telling you now, except that I've been thinking about what I wasted and that memory keeps coming back. The parking lot below was empty at this hour, wet from overnight rain, the asphalt black and shining under the sodium lights. A sparrow landed on a concrete barrier, inspected. The ground flew away. I'm not going to explain what I did, she said. I don't think explanations help you any. I just keep thinking about how much I understood love when I was 8 years old watching you two in that shop, and how completely I forgot it. And I can't figure out when the forgetting happened, or why, or whether I could have stopped it. Her voice thinned on those last words, not quite breaking, but coming close. And I heard something in it I hadn't heard in the interrogation room, hadn't heard through the courtroom. Glass hadn't heard in any of the formal observed moments between us. In the past year, I heard someone young again, confused about herself, searching for an answer that wasn't in any of the documents or evidence logs or legal proceedings. Wanda sent me a photograph, Paloma said, of me at the shop. I'm on a tire wearing those coveralls Mom made. I'm missing my front tooth. A small pause. I've been looking at it for a week, trying to figure out if that kid and this person are the same. I don't know the answer. I pressed my hand flat against the cold glass of the window. I know you sold the shop. The debt is gone now. You didn't have to do that. Another silence longer than the others. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. You knew what I did, and you still... She stopped, started again. I don't have a word for what that is. I've been trying to find one for months. It's not forgiveness. It's something harder than forgiveness. Something I don't think I deserved. Outside, a delivery truck moved slowly through the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across wet ground. I watched it until it turned out of sight. I'm not asking you to call back, she said. I'm not asking for visits. I know I don't get to ask for things right now. I just needed you to know that I understand what I destroyed. Not in the way I understood it at the trial that was legal understanding. Lists of damages, dollar amounts. This is different. This is sitting in a room at night, thinking about a woman handing her husband the right wrench without being asked, and realizing I had everything I needed to be someone good, and I chose not to be. The voicemail ended with a click. I stood at the window for a long time after. The automated message offered me options: replay, save, delete. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I pressed save, set the phone down on the windowsill, and went to make coffee. I didn't call her back that morning, or that week, but I saved the voicemail, and I played it again that evening, and several evenings after that, not to punish myself, not to pick apart her words for sincerity the way a detective might, but because her voice in that recording was the most honest thing she'd said to me in perhaps a very long time, and I wasn't ready to put it somewhere out of reach. The memoir was 40 pages long by then, still rough, still finding its shape. That night, I added a section I hadn't planned, a small paragraph about the Honda in the shop, about Renee handing me tools without being asked about Paloma watching from the front desk when she was supposed to be doing homework. I'd forgotten that memory entirely until she handed it back to me through a phone recording from a prison in central Indiana. It was strange the things grief returned to you when you stopped bracing against it. I thought about what Wanda had said months earlier, sitting at my kitchen table, that Renee had seen signs in Paloma even as a child, and chosen to love her through them, choosing hope over warning. I'd been angry at that somewhere in the middle of processing everything. It had felt like information I should have had a map I'd been denied while walking into a burning building. But sitting in that apartment with the voicemail saved on my phone, I thought about it differently. Renee hadn't withheld the truth to deceive me. She'd loved Paloma the way you love something fragile carefully, without crowding it, always leaving room for it to become something better than you feared it was. Maybe that was the only way to love a child who scared you. I didn't write back that week. I wrote 3 drafts and deleted all of them, each one collapsing under the weight of what I was trying to say the way hers had for 4 months. I understood that now, how some things resist language, not because they're unclear, but because they're too clear, too large for the container a letter provides. In the end, what I sent was simple, 1-page handwritten on the kind of plain paper I used for invoices. I told her I had the photograph, the one Wanda had also sent me, Paloma on the tire, the missing tooth the coveralls Renee had made. I told her it sat on my bookshelf now, between Renee's wedding portrait and a photo of Evander at graduation. I told her I looked at it in the mornings. I told her I remembered the Honda too. I told her she was right about her mother and the wrenches. I told her I still had the half-inch Craftsman in my apartment, the one Renee had used to teach her, righty-tighty and lefty-loosey, because I could not leave it behind when the shop sold. I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't promise visits. I didn't tell her everything would be repaired, because I didn't know whether it could be, and I'd spent enough of my life handing people comfortable lies wrapped in love. I told her to take care of herself. I told her the debt was gone and she didn't owe me for it. I told her that the girl on the tire had been real and I hadn't forgotten her. I sealed the envelope before I could change my mind and walked to the mailbox at the end of the block. The morning was cold, the kind of November cold that had a weight to it, and the street was quiet. I dropped the letter in, stood there a moment, hands in my pockets, looking at nothing in particular. Then I walked home and made breakfast and sat at the desk and opened the laptop because the story still wasn't finished and it wasn't going to write itself. When the doorbell rang that Sunday evening, I realized it was the first time in 2 years I'd set the table for more than one. I'd spent the afternoon cleaning, not the surface cleaning I did every week, but the kind where you move furniture and discover dust patterns that tell stories about neglect. The dining room table, which I'd been using as a workbench for organizing old invoices, had been cleared and polished. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses. The doorbell rang again. Evander stood on my porch holding a pie, and beside him was Dr. Ilaria Finch, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the clinical bun I remembered from the hospital. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She looked younger in jeans and a sweater, though I knew she was 42. We talked about it once during one of Evander's follow-up appointments. Harold, Evander said, and there was something different in his voice, lighter. "Thanks for having us." "Apple pie?" Ilaria said, handing it to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes quite yet. She was nervous. "I didn't know what you liked, so I went with the safest option." Not soup, I thought. Never soup again. "Apple's perfect," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Come on in, dinner's almost ready." The roast had turned out better than I expected, tender enough that the knife went through without sawing. I'd made mashed potatoes and green beans, the kind of meal Renee used to call Sunday supper, even when we had it on Thursdays. Evander helped me carry dishes to the table, while Ilaria looked at the photos on the mantel. "Is this your wife?" she asked, pointing to the picture of Renee at the lake, the one where she's laughing at something I'd said just before the shutter clicked. "Yeah, Renee. She passed away 4 years ago." "She was beautiful," Ilaria said softly. "Evander told me about her." We sat down, and for a few minutes there was just the sound of silverware on plates and the polite murmurs people make when food is good. I watched Evander cut his roast into careful pieces, the way he'd done everything since the poisoning, methodical, cautious, like he was relearning trust one action at a time. Then I saw him glance at Ilaria. It was the kind of look you can't fake, the kind where someone's face softens without them meaning it to, where their whole body relaxes just because the other person is in the room. I recognized it because I'd worn that expression myself 35 years ago. The first time Renee agreed to have coffee with me after I'd fixed her transmission for free. How do you measure the distance between grief and hope? Is it time? Is it the number of meals you eat alone before you can stand to set the table for someone else? Harold and Evander said, setting down his fork, "There's something we wanted to tell you." Ilaria's hand moved across the table just an inch until her fingers touched Evander's wrist, not holding on. Just touching. "We're moving in together," Evander said. "Next month. We found a place in Columbus near the hospital where Ilaria's transferring." I should have seen it coming. The phone calls had been getting longer, the visits more frequent. Evander had mentioned Columbus twice in the past month, always in passing, always like it didn't mean anything. "That's wonderful," I said and meant it. "Really, I'm happy for you both." "It's soon," Ilaria said quickly. "I know it's soon, but we've been—" "It's not too soon," I interrupted. "When you know, you know. Renee and I got engaged after 3 months. Her mother thought we'd lost our minds." Evander smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him since before the code blue. "Did you?" "Probably, but we were right anyway." I stood up and went to the cabinet where I kept the whiskey I never drank and the wine glasses Renee had insisted on buying, even though we only used them twice a year. I poured 3 glasses of water. Instead, Evander still couldn't drink alcohol, not after what the poison had done to his liver. "To the new beginnings," I said, raising my glass. To new beginnings, they echoed. The twist came during dessert when Ilaria was cutting the pie, and Evander excused himself to use the bathroom. She set down the knife and looked at me directly. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "The night Evander was admitted, when I was trying to stabilize him, I almost lost him. Twice. His heart stopped the second time for 43 seconds. I set down my fork. "He doesn't know that part," she continued. "I never put it in the official record because he came back, and what's the point of him carrying that weight? But you should know. You saved his life by getting him to the hospital when you did. 5 more minutes and I couldn't have brought him back. 43 seconds. The length of time it takes to walk from one end of my shop to the other. The length of time my daughter's plan had come to actually working." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you blame yourself," Ilaria said simply. "I can see it. You think you should have known, should have stopped it somehow. But you saved him, Harold. That's what matters." Evander's footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Ilaria picked up the pie server again, like we'd been talking about the weather. We finished dessert talking about Columbus, about the apartment they had found. With the balcony, Ilaria wanted to turn into an herb garden, about Evander's new job at an insurance company, the irony of which none of us mentioned, but all of us felt. Ilaria laughed at something I said about Evander's terrible coffee making, and the sound was so genuine, so unforced, that I caught myself thinking Renee would like her. The thought didn't hurt the way I expected it to. The rain had been falling for an hour before I noticed it. I had been sitting at the small desk by the window, with the laptop open, cursor blinking at the end of a paragraph I had written and rewritten 6 times, too absorbed in finding the right word to register the sound building against the glass. When I finally looked up, the window was streaked with long silver lines, the parking lot below shimmering under the street lamps, and somewhere deep in my chest, something loosened the way a rusted bolt gives after you've applied steady pressure long enough. 83 pages. That's what it added up to. I scrolled back to the top and read the first sentence once more. It was a Tuesday morning in November, and I was fasting for a diabetes test. 1 year ago, that sentence would have been the beginning of an ordinary day. Now, it was the beginning of something I'd spent months trying to put into words, not to explain myself, not to accuse anyone, but because some experiences grow heavier if you never set them down somewhere outside your own head. I'd started writing in May with no plan and no clear audience, just a need to make the sequence of events legible to myself. The soup, the hospital corridor, the basement light clicking on over those pharmacy boxes, Quentin's careful hands bagging everything in clear plastic, Paloma's face through the courtroom doorway on the last day before the doors closed between us. I'd written it all without censoring the grief, the anger, the moments of absurd dark humor, the nights I'd sat in Renee's chair just breathing. Somewhere in the process, the writing had started doing something unexpected. It hadn't erased anything. The memories were still exactly as sharp, still capable of stopping me mid-sentence the way sudden cold stops your breath. But writing them down had given them a location outside my body. I could close the laptop. I could walk to the kitchen and make tea and come back. The story would still be there waiting on the screen, and it would not have grown while I was gone. I scrolled to the final paragraph and read it aloud to the empty room. I brought the soup to the hospital because I love my son-in-law. I didn't know I was carrying a trap, but that Tuesday morning taught me love is not enough to protect people from themselves. I sat with those words for a long moment. Then I clicked into the title field and typed 3 words I'd been circling for months: the price of greed. The document saved with a small sound, the laptop's fan going quiet. I got up, filled the kettle, and stood at the kitchen window while the water heated. The rain had intensified, coming down in sheets, now blurring the streetlights into soft halos. A couple walked past, below sharing an umbrella that wasn't quite wide enough, their shoulders pressed together under the inadequate shelter. I watched them until they turned the corner and disappeared. 2 weeks ago, Evander and Ilaria had sat at my dining room table eating roast and apple pie, their hands occasionally touching the way people's hands do when they're still learning each other's rhythms, cautious, deliberate, quietly amazed. Watching them, I'd felt something I hadn't expected, not envy, not grief, but a kind of gratitude that surprised me with its steadiness. Some things that should have ended in irreversible damage had instead slowly, stubbornly turned towards something worth having. The kettle clicked off. I poured the tea and carried it to the living room. The bookshelf held 3 photographs now. I'd arranged them deliberately a few weeks back, replacing the random cluster that had accumulated over years with something more intentional. Paloma, at 7, sitting on a tire in the shop, both hands black with grease from her first successful spark plug change. grinning with the particular pride of a child who has just discovered what she is capable of. Renee on our wedding day, white flowers pinned into her hair, a happiness on her face so complete it looked almost like disbelief, as though she hadn't quite expected life to come through this generously. Evander at his nursing school graduation, hollow-eyed from exhaustion, shoulders squared with something that would eventually become the steadiness that saved his own life. I picked up the wrench from where it lay across 2 books beside the photographs, half-inch craftsman chrome worn to bare metal along the grip, scratched and oil-darkened in the way tools get when they've been used seriously over a long period. I'd brought it with me when I sold the shop, the one object I couldn't leave behind. Renee had held this exact wrench while teaching Paloma the difference between tightening and loosening, making a game of the memory device righty-tighty, lefty-loosey until our daughter had it cold. The weight of it was familiar, unchanging, real in a way that the past 2 years had frequently not felt. I set it back carefully and touched the corner of Paloma's photograph. The question I'd been carrying since November, when did she change and where was, I had not resolved itself over the course of writing 83 pages. I'd gone looking for the answer in every chapter, turned it over from every angle, and come up empty each time. Maybe it was the wrong question. Maybe people don't change so much as reveal themselves gradually, and what shifts is only our willingness to see. What I knew for certain, the girl in that photograph had been real. Whatever came after the accounting notebooks, the forged signatures, the careful theft of poison from a locked pharmaceutical cabinet, none of it erased the afternoon she'd changed her first spark plug and looked up at me with that gap-toothed grin, as though she'd just proven something important about who she was. Both versions of her were true. I'd spent months trying to choose between them, as though only one could stand. I'd finally stopped choosing. I said goodnight to the photographs, the way I'd gotten in the habit of doing quietly without embarrassment, and turned off the living room lamp. The hallway held the dark shapes of familiar furniture. The bedroom was cool and dim. I lay in bed listening to the rain on the roof. The sound was steady and indifferent in the way weather always is, asking nothing, offering nothing, just persisting. Somewhere, 600 miles away, my daughter was lying in her own narrow darkness. Somewhere in Columbus, Evander and Ilaria were probably doing what ordinary people in early relationships do on rainy Sunday evenings, making something simple for dinner, arguing pleasantly about what to watch, finding their way into a future neither could have predicted a year ago. I thought about the memoir sitting finished on my hard drive, its title settled, its ending written. And I thought some stories don't end. They reach a point where the teller has said everything honest that can be said, and then they hand it over to silence, to time to whatever reader might one day need it. I closed my eyes. The rain kept on. I slept. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest. I spent 30 years teaching my daughter right from wrong, and I thought that was enough. But I was blind to the greed growing in her heart. Don't make my mistake. Don't assume that love alone can save someone from their own darkness. Sometimes the hardest lesson a father learns is that you can't protect your children from themselves, no matter how much you want to. This dad family revenge story isn't about getting even, it's about finding peace when family betrays family. These family stories, revenge, teach us that justice and healing aren't the same. I believe God put me through this so I could share this truth. Forgiveness isn't required for peace. What matters is accepting reality and choosing to keep going. If you're facing your own dad family revenge situation, the pain doesn't disappear, but it transforms. Family stories, revenge like mine, show that sometimes the strongest act isn't fighting back, it's letting go, while standing firm in truth. I'd love to hear from you. In the comments, have you experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you find your way forward? If this story touched you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like more family stories, revenge like this one, subscribe to Dad's Calm Revenge. Your support means everything to me. Thank you for staying until the very end. Sharing this story wasn't easy, but knowing you listened makes it worthwhile. One final note. Some details in this story have been adjusted for privacy and storytelling purposes. What remains true is the lesson, and I hope it stays with you.